Welcome to the Sirius report. This is Paul, and obviously joined by Ken today. But more importantly, we are joined today again by a previous guest, David Lee. I'm sure many of you know who he is. He has quite a significant profile on X. He's just recently reached 20,000 followers, which is more than well deserved. He makes great posts, great incisive comments. He's very popular. So, David, welcome and thank you for joining us again today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. So, I guess it was obvious where we would start today, in that there's been just the recent meeting between the Chinese and the United States, and obviously Xi and Trump. So, David, we thought we'd start with getting your thoughts on what you think has actually happened, because as usual in the US media and anything surrounding the Trump administration, there's a lot of bloviating going on and claims made that, frankly, don't bear up to scrutiny, unsurprisingly.
Well, maybe let me step back a little bit. Um, over the weekend, they have a meeting in Kuala Lumpur, and of course, Li Chenggang was leading the Chinese team. Of course, Mr. He was the leader, but Li Chenggang was the lead negotiator. Of course, a lot of people was thinking that he has been reassigned after he got relief from the WTO position. I've seen so many posts talking about what a great win for Percent, getting this move warrior out of the negotiation team. Little do they know that that has been planned since April. He has been promoted to the lead negotiator, which is a full ministerial level. And so as a result of that, he need to relieve some of the lower level job, which is a WTO representative. So it took China about 6 months to find the person. So it was announced a few weeks ago, and everybody got it differently. So the meeting went, I think, well. According to Li Chenggang was saying that the U.S. was very firm or tough in the demand, but China position was unwavering. So as a result, they come up with some agreement. Nobody really know what it was. And then we have this Trump-Xi meeting. Trump has been talking about putting a lot of chips on the table, saying that they would talk about the Blackwell chip, they would talk about Taiwan, and they would talk for 3 to 4 hours. Eventually, they talk about 100 minutes, so 1 hour, 40 minutes. And bear in mind that they need translation. So that means they have about 15 minutes in real talk. And each side pretty much have 25 minutes. So you can see that there's not a whole lot of discussion that actually went on. If they could have gone for 4 hours, I think they would have done a lot more discussion. At the end of the discussion, Trump basically was saying how successful it was. It was out of 10, he rated this discussion as 12. Everything seems to be great, almost have a deal signed. China basically backed off the rare earth export control, so it's a huge win for US. And US basically give in a little bit, give 10% of the fentanyl tariff. If you recall, back in, I think, March, US imposed 20% tariff on China, saying that because it's fentanyl, you are not helping us, so we put 20%. So now you take 50% off, so it's 10% is off the table, so we still have 10%. And at that time, after the fentanyl tariff, China retaliate and basically say, I think it was 10% for all the agricultural product and 15% for US energy to impose on US. And so that was one reason why China was not buying US soybean since May. Before that, China was still buying it. But once you have the 10% tariff, and with Latin America having bumper harvest this year. So China was able to get a lot of the soybean from Brazil and a few shipments from Argentina. And as I mentioned on X, over the last few weeks, China also saw that a huge increase in Brazilian soybean in terms of price. Nowadays, the Brazilian price is actually higher than the US price before tariff. And so as a result, the tariff was the only reason why China is not buying US soybeans. And if China can relieve some of these 10% tariff, it makes economic sense for China to buy soybeans from US. So there was a lot of discussion about exactly what happened, and no one really knows because there's no joint communique, there's no joint statement, there's no press release jointly. Trump basically did an interview on Air Force One, and China has a press release, or actually is as a Q&A with the reporter of the Ministry of Commerce, and they actually talk about what was agreed upon. And so while Trump was claiming victory, he actually claimed victory maybe within an hour after the meeting, and then China was very slow in responding, and tried to respond probably about 2-3 hours after the meeting. So all the press was talking about Trump's viewpoint, how the result was. Even Chinese media was talking about that. They always put down Trump said this, Trump said that. So there was a initial reaction is, basically China kneeled down and Trump basically has a holistic victory. But when we look at the MOFCOM, which is the Chinese Ministry of Commerce release, what we saw is pretty much a backing off on both sides. So US back off in terms of 10% fentanyl tariff, and China will adjust the countermeasure. And what the countermeasure means is agricultural products tariff and also energy products. So that's why Trump was saying that, China will buy a lot of soybeans and also a lot of US energy immediately. But I don't think that immediately really would happen. They would buy some. I think there's an order of 180,000 tons of soybeans already being placed by COFCO, but it's not going to be anywhere close to what it used to be. I think in 2024, China basically bought about 22 million tons. So far this year, for the pretty much first 4 or 5 months, they bought about 5 million. And so there's a 17 million gap. And now they are talking about 180,000. So we need to see China to buy almost 17 million tons in the next 3 months in order to make up the gap. And it's almost impossible for China to do so. There will be some energy purchase, but I'm not sure how US energy will be competitive compared with, for example, Russian energies and other energies. So that will be one area that we do see that there's some progress. And one of the reasons why there was almost a breakup of negotiation in October was because late in September, US Commerce Department under Lutnick, under one department called the BIS, they have roll out an entity list and basically have a 50% rule of the entity list. So US has been sanctioning Chinese companies for 7-8 years now. And what they used to do is I would sanction one company, and that company will be on this entity list, and anyone within this company will sanction, but not on related companies. The 50% rule basically say if there's any company with 50% shareholders structures that is linked to this entity, that's sanctioned companies, then that other company would also be sanctioned. So all of a sudden, the number of sanctioned companies in China rose from 1,000 to 20,000. And that's one of the reasons why the Dutch company Nexperia was actually, the Dutch basically removed the CEO and basically took over the company. Is because Nexperia, because of it's linked to Wingtech, because Wingtech is own Nexperia. Wingtech is under sanction, and so Nexperia will be sanctioned, and unless it's under a Dutch structure, ownership structure. So the Dutch government took over, and what happened afterwards is very obvious, and everybody knows. China basically have an export ban of Nexperia China entity, and so as a result, there's a global shortage of Nexperia chips. So with that, BIS 50% rule that came in at the end of September, right before the shutdown. China was actually in the shutdown during the October holiday. And by the time they came back on October 9th, they rolled out 6 policies by, I think it's Ministry of Commerce also, that basically rolled out the, China has been having about some rare earth export control for 1 to 2 years already. But now they added a few things. One is they added the some heavy duty rare earth. And those are critical for making motors and magnets. And also they added the 0.1% rule. That means that China is saying that no matter where you make your product, if you make your product with Chinese technology and Chinese rare earth, if its content is 0.1% larger, then you need to ask for Chinese approval. So what it means technically is if ASML need to sell a EUV machines to TSMC, given that it used some rare earth in its EUV machines, it needs approval from China before it can sell to TSMC. And this is exactly, to some extent, is what US has been doing with regard to high-tech sanction on China. And so China is basically doing the same thing with long-arm jurisdiction and enforcing it onto Western companies. And this basically raised hell all over G7, and everybody was basically panicking. And that's when Trump was saying that we need to have 100% tariff on China. And so what they agree upon in this meeting was if US can remove the BIS 50% rule, China will suspend the rare earth export control for 1 year. But this is only on the export control that was announced on October 9th. So a lot of people were saying that, well, China, why do they basically throw away this export control card? China has not thrown it out. China only threw out the October 9th announcement, which is the 5 heavy rare earth elements plus the 0.1% rule. There were some other things with regard to equipment and Chinese personnel not able to work on rare earth refining for foreign companies. Those will be suspended. And so this is one thing that, of course, in the Trump briefing, he, number one, omitted the 50% rule. Number two, he exaggerated the rare earth control that was suspended to everything. But in reality, the Chinese did not see it that way. The third one is on the 301 investigation on maritime and logistics. And you do recall that US tried to put port fee on anything that is made, any ship that is made in China. China basically have a reciprocal port fee on any ships that has 25% ownership of American investor or American board members. So as a result, China basically retaliated to a much larger fleet compared with American fleet. Because if you look at fleet built by America, pretty much that's non-existing. I think they only have maybe a few ships. But if you look at the financial structure of the companies, so for example, one of the companies that people talk about is the BHP. BHP has more than 25% owners and directors are Americans. And so as a result, it was sanctioned. So both sides also agree of suspending this for 1 year. So in essence, it's a give and take. And I would say that both sides get what they want, and both sides need to give up something that they impose on the other side. So it's more like a balanced negotiation. It's not one side win it all, like Trump would like to say, but is to some extent it's fair. And one very interesting thing is after the BIS fiasco, Lutnick was disappearing, well, pretty much disappeared from the press for a few weeks because there were rumors that Trump was extremely angry at him because of this fiasco leading to the rare escalation. But Lutnick was actually sitting in the meeting in South Korea today. And so it's very interesting that he was one of the person involved in the discussion. So all in all, I would say that it's too early to tell what are the results because both sides has a version what happened. I tend to believe in the Chinese version because it actually makes more sense and is more details, specifically saying that which countermeasure or tariff has been taken off. Trump is like to exaggerate a lot, but we'll have to see in the coming days what are some of the reactions. But what we saw in Asia is immediately after the meeting, people do see that the meeting is not that one-sided. Gold and silver both rally. That means that there's the trade war is risk is I would say it is toned down a little bit, but it's not business as usual as we used to like to see. And so, of course, there's a discussion about why China would even give face to Trump for him to get a way out. And I think there's a few very interesting discussion behind the scene. Back in the Madrid discussion, even Bazet mentioned that China has a very comprehensive and very large proposal on the table for US. And so he said he would not be able to make a decision. He would need to get back to them. And no one really knows what it was. I think there was some press release, but there was some press breaking the news as one is China is saying that it is willing to invest $1 trillion in the US over the next 5 years. And if that is the case, in return, they want to relieve some of the tariff issues that we see. And the question is, who would be investing in US that US would say no? My intuition would say that what if Huawei is investing in US? What if BYD is investing in US? If you open that up for Chinese company into US, the whole auto industry will be gone. Apple will be gone. So this is something that maybe China is willing to do that, but maybe Trump is not brave enough to take that offer. The other rumor was China was actually telling Bazet is, what if we can actually roll back everything to pre-2018, before the kidnapping of Huawei CFO at that time? And if we go back to pre-trade war, let's do everything as usual. We have the rare earth for everybody. You have the chip for everyone. There's no tariff whatsoever. And this is another thing that it would be very hard for Trump to convince his hawkish party members and also the Democrats to accept that. And so these are the two possibilities. But lately, there's another rumor circulating around some Asian analysts is there is some possibility that Trump might be pivoting away from the Taiwan topic. And of course, U.S. has been working with Taiwan indirectly all the time and supporting the Taiwanese government. From Chinese standpoint, it is more of a domestic situation. It's not something that the U.S. should be involved. And Xi actually talked to Biden a couple of years, I think last year or a couple of years ago, asking him to directly say that he does not support Taiwan independence. And Biden didn't really give an answer. And very interestingly, back about 2 weeks ago, RAND Corporation, or RAND, I think it's a think tank, RAND, R-A-N-D, it has a very strong ties and history with the U.S. military. I think it was actually started within the military as a think tank and eventually become a sort of non-profit organization, but always talk about the military stuff. It actually released a paper, I think on the 14th of October, saying that maybe, first of all, it's not wise to have a war with China. Second point is maybe it is time for U.S. to reconsider whether it is time to support a gradual reintegration or reunification of Taiwan into China. And so if that is the case, that is a huge deal for China, and China would be more than happy to have some concessions given to Trump. Of course, Trump actually mentioned about he'll be talking about China before the meeting, but he actually said that there's no discussion in the meeting. And it will be very awkward for Trump to actually have Trump and Xi has such a discussion in South Korea rather than when Trump come to China in early next year or late December to actually meet with Xi and actually talk about that. And I think there is a lot of questions about what are the carrot that the U.S. is given to China so that China is actually open up and continue this discussion. Because I've mentioned multiple times that China has been on the verge of decoupling with U.S. And has been preparing, number one, in terms of export. U.S. export to U.S. right now is less than 10% of the total export. So it's not that important of a market. Number two is in terms of trade, is actually trading a lot with ASEAN countries, the RCEP that they just signed an agreement recently, actually expand their cooperation and trade. And also, with regard to trade settlement, there's a lot of questions whether U.S. can eventually do the nuclear option of kicking China out of SWIFT. And if it does so, what China would do is just go to CIPS and just go and work with all the nations that are top trading partner with China. There's 150 of those, and just switch it onto CIPS. There's just a article on this last week, and China is actually linked up CIPS with 180 nations already. And of course, one of our mutual friend, King Kong, has always talked about the potential of using SGE Gold as a collateral for trade financing and also development financing. Now that Hong Kong has a 2,000 tons vote, trying to attract all the central bank gold reserve to basically put it over there. So a lot of all these indications are saying that China is almost pushing the button to go decouple. But they still continue to talk to Trump on this. That means there's something much, much bigger at the back. And so we will have to see the development in the next few weeks. What I know is the Taiwan media is actually talking a lot about this RAND paper and talk a lot about the potential that U.S. might be ditching Taiwan. And at the same time, the neocon Rubio has been very vocal that we will never forsake Taiwan, so we will always be standing with Taiwan. And so we don't know exactly what is the administration position at this point. I think we will see more development over the next few weeks. So I think in a nutshell, this is my take on today's meeting.
Well, thank you, Dave. That's a wonderful appraisal. Ken, do you want to share some thoughts and then I'll give you my perspective? Because I've heard a couple of things in relation to what you've been talking about, David. So, Ken?
Yeah, David, I got three quick points I'd love to hear your assessment and thoughts on. I don't know if it was, I'm pretty sure it was, but I'm not sure. You can go ahead and correct me. But there was a Chinese official that came out, I think, recently, who said that the China cannot trust the U.S. in regards to any type of policy because it tends to change over each administration. For example, we know that back in the Clinton era, we had the acceptance into the WTO. We had uh, most favored nation, and then of course over time, each administration has used it for political purposes to either utilize China for their benefit or to put screws on China for some other political thing. The other question I would have is this. The U.S. is, especially the Trump administration, has made it clear that they are in a technology war against China, especially over AI. And it's one of the big reasons why they're trying to limit high-level chips going to China for national security reasons. So why would Beijing allow an increase of rare earths and the processing of those rare earths to go to the United States, who is called itself an adversary in this battle for AI and battle for innovation? And finally, the last thing is in regards to tariffs, there for the longest time in history, tariffs were a way to protect your own industries or your own agriculture from other nations dumping cheaper products into your country. That's understandable. But over the last decade or so, tariffs are now being used as geopolitical weapons, the same way sanctions are being used. So, surprisingly, any type of uh, question in regards to limiting or quelling tariffs, it doesn't seem that it has anything to do with trade, but more with geopolitics.
Um, let's go to the first question that you have with regard to the Chinese official. I think what you said was, I would think that the Chinese official was extremely generous. It is not every administration, is even within the administration, they can never keep the promise. So there's a saying in Asia that the American are incapable of coming to an agreement and incapable of keeping an agreement. So take a look at just the tariff negotiation. They agree that they will not escalate, will not put in new sanctions. And then Lutnick, BIS 50% rules completely changed the game. And so that's why the whole trade discussion completely broke down. And Bazet has to go in to talk to China, and Lutnick was basically kicked out of the team. And so there's definitely a worry of that. So I would not be very, very surprised that I think even if they come to agreement, they will go back to the Ronald Reagan model: is trust but verify, right? So they really, I think over the last few administration, the reputation of Americans has really suffered a tremendous damage. And even in the business, I think a lot of them, they would not trust US as a reliable suppliers going forward. And that's number one. I think number two is with regard to the AI area. I think the AI areas, AI is not like supernatural. AI is just machines that have learning capability, can actually think or do some analysis and think to the next level. I think the major issues is in US right now is the business model of AI is not necessarily sustainable. So the way that US use AI is US would throw in raw power of computing. And by having the best chips you have, by having a closed system, they throw in a lot of energy, a lot of chips, and using raw calculation force and push for the AI solutions. And everybody, if you want to do AI, because it's too expensive for you to do it, you just have to rent my capacity. And you pay me, I do the calculation for you. And this is how the business model works. And you see a lot of the related transactions. So for example, NVIDIA would invest into OpenAI, and OpenAI will buy chips from NVIDIA, and now Oracle get their hands into the two. And so the three would work among each other. To some extent, it's basically boosting the revenue because a lot of the chips that NVIDIA sell is to some extent is selling to their customers, but the customers basically get the money from NVIDIA as a capital. So there's a lot of this going on. And I think the China model is a little bit different. China basically say that, number one, we don't have the best chips. So we won't be able to compete with you. You have the Blackwell chips. We don't even have the H100. But we have some good enough chip that is as good as H20. But if we can use computing to enhance the whole system, then we might be able to compete with you. So this is very interesting because this is a holistic angle look at AI and computing. And also China would say that, hey, our goal is not to make money. So DeepSeek is not like generating a huge amount of cash. What is important is embedded this AI into all the downstream businesses so that they can use your AI to make money. And if they can make money, then the whole nation, the whole ecosystem of AI will thrive. And so this is a very different model design. And I think the China doesn't really worry too much about the US model because they don't think that US model would be sustainable going forward. And because at the end of the day, whichever model get the more participants, you have the network effect. It's not just like the VHS versus beta in the past. Beta is supposedly a much better technology, and VHS is not that good. But because of the network model, everybody go to VHS. And so, given that it's a low-cost open source model, the Chinese model actually can attract a lot more participants. And with more participants, if like 3/4 of the world population is using OpenAI, using a Chinese model, then it would be very difficult for the US model to survive with only 25% of populations. So this is something that we do see that is maybe evolving. And so I think that this is not something that China worry too much about. But in terms of rare export control right now, the export is still controlled for military use. So if you're going to use for missiles and everything, we won't be exporting. I forgot the third question that you have.
Yeah, let me make one comment on what you said, and then I'll go ahead and give the third.
Sure.
The one thing I've noticed, the big difference between the US's AI push, where they spent trillions of dollars, and in my opinion, they don't have the energy infrastructure to even come close to what they're claiming. But the one thing I've noticed, and especially even watching on social media, China is using AI and they're using it for application. You can actually see the use of AI in things as simple as some of their like the fantastic drone expositions that they do in the sky for the people. The way it's working in their hypertrain modeling. They're using it for application. It's an open source, but it's also being used in day-to-day things that help people. In the US side, this whole thing is about building a corporate structure of who controls AI to an extreme level, and it's about making money. They really haven't even discussed how AI is going to make applications that are beneficial to the people. And I think that that's a big difference between the two. The final thing was in regards to tariffs.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, to me, it's difficult if the original tariff model back in the day was to protect one's own domestic industries. But instead, I see tariffs being used as geopolitical weapons, the same way that the US is using sanctions as geopolitical weapons. So, with this in mind, how difficult is it for negotiations between China, Russia, or any of the other nations to have to deal with the United States? Because I'll give a great example. They want chips from Nexperia to be able to build their EV vehicles and other technology in Europe, but they don't want to have to compete with Chinese EV vehicles as domestic imports. Why? Because they can't compete on price. So they want in essence, they want their cake and eat it too, while expecting China to deliver what they want, but not accommodate China for what, you know, would be an equal quid pro quo.
Yep. I always have a question why we need to use tariff because if you look at US, what exactly are we manufacturing that we need to protect? Other than vehicles, maybe Boeing, I don't see a whole lot of manufacturing that we are protecting. Um, going to a lot of things you buy at Walmart, they are not produced in US. And even if China no longer export to US, it would still not be able to manufacture and compete with all the other countries. So I think Trump is not necessarily using tariff as a bring manufacturing back to US as he claimed. It's more a tool to get foreign nations to invest in US and to basically get to a certain extent more tax revenue from the public while spinning it as uh, paid by China, paid by Japan, paid by Korea. And so I think after 6 months of this, the market pretty much realized that. I think Goldman had a report out that basically 60+% of the tariffs is paid by consumers, 20+% paid by importer, only maybe 10% paid by the exporter. So I don't think it is an effective way, but it is effective if you are a nation that is totally dependent and completely unprepared to decouple with US. So as a result, you go to Korea, go to Japan, Trump can sign great deals because that's all. I mean, what else can they do? They are totally dependent. I'm actually very surprised that Canada can last that long, given how dependent of the export structure going to US. But seems like that this is one way that Trump's want to push his financial agenda going forward. I'm not sure that it would last too long. First of all, there's a hurdle with the Supreme Court whether this is legitimate, and also next year we will have the elections, and I'm not sure that the support base for Trump will continue to support if this leads to higher inflations in the in the place they go to. So I would think that probably in the next few months, we'll see whether there will be a completely abandonment of the tariff.
Agreed, and all great points. And I think you hit the nail on the head on one specific thing is even with the government shutdown going on, there are some major domestic problems within the United States that if Trump is focusing too much on trying to instill or implement his will on foreign countries, he's going to miss the boat on what's happening within the U.S. itself.
Agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that, gentlemen. The only things I would add to this discussion point, the whole issue of this $1 trillion investment by the Chinese, whether it's 5 years or 50 years, it doesn't matter. That's not a correct figure. I think the truth of the matter is the United States has, we know for a fact, been begging the Chinese to buy hundreds of billions of dollars of treasuries during the Biden administration and even during the start of the Trump administration. And the Chinese said, no, sorry, we're not doing it because of all the other nonsense, of course, that was going on. Now, in terms of a Chinese investment and whatever the figure might be in the end, it's all predicated on the fact that the United States would have to go back, as you rightly said, David, to the pre-2018 trade war. So everything gets removed across the board. Nothing's in place on either side. It's like, let's have a whole new drawing board from scratch. Then we can consider on that basis potentially making investments. But you're equally right to say there's going to be some issues if the Chinese go, well, Huawei will make massive investments in the United States because, of course, that's never going to happen as things stand, although, never say never. So I think that is the first point. And I think also with regards to this current meeting with Xi and Trump, and obviously the trade meeting and the economic meetings we've had prior to that, China once again said we just need to revert to pre-2018. Let's just take it back, remove everything, and then start working through things on an individual basis. And then we can reach some decisions how we can work together, economically, what we're capable of doing financially, etc., and that we can complement each other. The issue of Taiwan is part of that equation. There is no doubt. And I in my own podcast did a big, lengthy, sort of 40-minute discussion about the Rand report and all the implications of it, because that might be the olive branch that says, if we walk away from Taiwan, then China is going to see that as one of the biggest wins in its history, because that removes a massive problem or potential problem for them. And that, could therefore be a bargaining chip that the United States could utilize going forward. But I think the other point was, and you obviously just mentioned it, I'll reiterate it, in terms of these export controls, it does still apply for military purposes, just not civilian purposes. That's the big point, because I've had a few people getting in touch going to me today. Why did the Chinese capitulate on that? I said, no, they haven't. They read the statement carefully because they suspended the implementation of the measures, as you said, David, on October the 9th. And so I think overall it comes back to this point for China and its trust. And the United States has been extremely untrustworthy for a very long time. But if, and it's a massive if, the United States was to actually start behaving like a responsible adult, then I think China would be more than happy to work with them and, for what I term, to help make the United States a great nation amongst equals, not an hegemonic power. And I think, for me, that's the big difference in attitude between the two countries. But the US has not got a good history, as we all know, of being trustworthy about anything.
Yep. One point I would like to raise is, you remember our conversation late last year with regard to China is sort of setting a trap for US to follow the Soviet Union. that's sucking them into arms race with all these sixth generation fighter. And of course, US basically immediately said that there will be a F-47 because Trump is 47. So F-47, the sixth generation fighter, the first sixth generation fighter in the world. And then September 3rd, the parade basically showcased all the weaponry that China has in its arsenal. If you want nuclear, we have nuclear. If you want conventional weapons, they have conventional weapons. And then within 2 weeks, Pentagon basically has a new strategy that we need to basically pivot away from the world and more focus in our backyard or in the home front. And that is only in mid-September. And then by mid-October, Rand Corporation, Rand paper talk about, well, maybe we should not even fight with China and just let go of Taiwan. So seems like that Trump is not so much on the ideology, but more on a pragmatic person. Knowing that there's no way that we can win, don't throw all your eggs into the defense. And so even though we are putting more money into defense, but don't throw all the money into defense, let's scale back and let's try to think about living as a co-equal. And I think mentally, he is preparing for that, even though it is very hard for him to talk to his base and talk to his ally in Congress to push for this. And I think this is less of a problem with Xi, but more of a problem with the Congress and the Senate.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an extremely important point, and I'm really glad you made it. So, has anyone else got anything else they'd like to add? Because I think before we sort of end this podcast.
I think David answered quite a few of the questions that I had really well. So I think we covered quite a bit.
So, David, anything to add finally?
No, I think we covered quite a lot already in the last 40 minutes.
Yes, we did. Well, David, thank you for joining us again. It's always a real pleasure. I really like it when we get together and you obviously impart everyone with your understanding, your wisdom, and your very calm delivery. So thank you very much again for joining us today.
Thank you.
And with that, I'll obviously say goodbye. But firstly, thank you to everyone who supports this channel. As ever, please like, share, subscribe, spread the word. We're trying to grow the channel because at the end of the day, to coin my overused phrase, I think people should be informed and not entertained. And with that, I'll therefore say goodbye.